The heart of any farmer's market beats with a rhythm unique to its community, and Miguel's corner of this vibrant ecosystem has been his sanctuary for over a decade. Every morning, before the sun fully rises over the city skyline, Miguel meticulously arranges his fresh produce in a display that could rival any artist's canvas. The deep purples of fresh plums nestle against the sunny brightness of ripe lemons, while pyramids of carefully stacked apples create a natural geometry that catches the early morning light. Miguel's stand represents more than just a business. It's a testament to the American dream pursued with dedication and dignity. His weathered hands, marked by years of selecting the finest produce and serving his community, move with practiced precision as he arranges each piece of fruit. The morning ritual, perfected over countless dawns, transforms his simple wooden stand into a cornucopia of colors and possibilities. The relationships Miguel has cultivated over the years run as deep as the roots of the trees that bear his fruits. Regular customers don't just come for the quality of his produce. They come for his warm smile, his genuine interest in their lives, and the way he remembers their preferences with unwavering accuracy. Mrs. Johnson, who visits every Tuesday, always gets her apples hand-picked by Miguel. "Not too soft, not too hard, just perfect for my pies," she often says. The Rodriguez family stops by on weekends, their children's eyes lighting up when Miguel sneaks an extra orange into their bag with a conspiratorial wink. His own family's presence is felt even when they're not physically at the stand. The hand-painted sign bearing their family name was crafted by his daughter during one summer break. The small shelf behind the counter holds family photos: his son's baseball team victory, his wife's citizenship ceremony, their first family picture in front of the stand. These glimpses of personal life transform the simple market stall into a chapter of their ongoing American story. The economic reality of running a small business is never far from Miguel's mind, but he's managed to turn even this challenge into an opportunity for connection. He works with local farmers, building relationships that ensure he gets the best produce while supporting his regional agricultural community. His pricing remains fair, even during tough times, earning him respect from both customers and fellow vendors. The modest profits from his stand have put both his children through school and maintained a roof over their heads, achievements that fill him with quiet pride. The market itself has become an extension of Miguel's family. The coffee vendor 2 stalls down saves him a fresh cup every morning, made exactly how he likes it. The flower seller occasionally decorates his stand with fresh blooms to bring more color, she says, though they both know his fruit display needs no enhancement. These small gestures of community weave a tapestry of belonging that makes every day at the market feel like a gathering of old friends. Even in challenging times, Miguel's stand has remained a constant source of stability for the community. During the recent economic downturn, he found ways to help struggling families, sometimes slipping extra produce into bags or quietly extending credit to trusted customers going through hard times. These acts of kindness, performed without fanfare or expectation of recognition, exemplify the deep bonds that exist beyond mere commercial transactions. Officer Jenkins's arrival at the market that morning carried with it an immediate shift in atmosphere, like a sudden drop in barometric pressure before a storm. His presence, rigid, purposeful, and somehow threatening, cut through the market's usual morning bustle with discordant precision. The way he moved between the stalls suggested someone looking not for fresh produce but for trouble, his eyes scanning the vendors with a predatory intensity that made several of them instinctively adjust their postures or avert their gazes. The officer's uniform, normally a symbol of protection and service, seemed transformed into something more menacing by his bearing and demeanor. His badge caught the morning light with each step, flashing like warning signals to those who noticed his approach. The casual conversations and laughter that typically filled the market began to die down in his wake, replaced by whispered observations and concerned glances between vendors and customers alike. Jenkins's focus on Miguel's stand wasn't random. There was a deliberate quality to his movement that suggested premeditation. The way he positioned himself, slightly off-center but directly in Miguel's line of sight, spoke of tactical positioning rather than casual interest. His hand rested casually on his belt, close to his equipment, in what appeared to be a subtle but clear display of authority and potential threat. The initial moments of his arrival created ripples of tension that spread through the market like waves in a pond. Regular customers who had been chatting with Miguel moments before found reasons to step back, not out of agreement with the officer's apparent intentions, but out of an instinctive response to the palpable tension now filling the air. A young mother pulled her curious child closer to her side, while an elderly gentleman paused in his shopping to watch the scene unfold with evident concern. The contrast between Miguel's peaceful morning routine and Jenkins's intrusion couldn't have been more stark. Just moments before, Miguel had been explaining the ripeness of avocados to a young couple, his hands gently demonstrating the proper way to test for freshness. Now those same hands hung motionless at his sides as he registered the officer's presence and the implicit threat it carried. The transition from peace to potential conflict happened in the space of a heartbeat, yet its effects rippled through the entire market community. What made Jenkins's presence particularly disturbing was its calculated nature. He hadn't arrived in response to a call or a reported disturbance. There was no obvious cause for law enforcement presence at a peaceful morning market. Instead, his arrival carried the weight of predetermined purpose, suggesting that Miguel's stand had been specifically targeted for this interaction. The badge and uniform, meant to represent protection and justice, were being wielded as tools of intimidation and bias. The initial exchange of glances between Officer Jenkins and Miguel contained volumes of unspoken context, a history of similar confrontations, both personal and societal, that stretched far beyond this single moment at a farmer's market. Miguel's expression, maintaining dignity while registering recognition of the situation's potential danger, reflected generations of learned responses to such encounters. Jenkins's barely concealed contempt, visible in the curl of his lip and the set of his shoulders, similarly spoke to deeply ingrained prejudices given power through authority. These opening moments, before any words were exchanged, set the stage for what was to follow. The peaceful, community-centered atmosphere of the market had been abruptly transformed into a theater of tension, where every gesture and word would carry heightened significance. The very air seemed to grow thick with anticipation as market-goers realized they were about to witness either another quiet submission to authority or something altogether different. A moment when a community might choose to stand against injustice. The demand for identification shattered the morning air like broken glass. Officer Jenkins's voice, laden with unmasked contempt, carried across the market space with deliberate volume, ensuring that his confrontation with Miguel would have an audience. "Let me see your ID," he barked, the words twisted with an underlying message that transcended the simple request. Each syllable dripped with presumption of guilt, of otherness, of unbelonging. Miguel's hands, which had spent the morning arranging produce with artistic care, now moved with deliberate slowness as he reached for his wallet. Years of experience, both personal and observed, had taught him the choreography of such moments. Every movement needed to be telegraphed, every action slow and visible. His fingers, despite years of dignified service to his community, now trembled slightly as they retrieved his identification, not from fear but from the contained emotion of yet another unwarranted confrontation. The officer's stance grew more aggressive with each passing second, his body language a study in barely contained hostility. He positioned himself with calculated intimidation, one hand resting meaningfully on his utility belt, while the other extended imperiously for Miguel's ID. The morning sun caught his badge, creating a harsh glare that seemed to mirror the steel in his voice and the rigid set of his jaw. The surrounding market, normally alive with the sounds of commerce and community, fell into an uneasy silence punctuated only by the officer's increasingly hostile questioning. "You people always think you can get away with something," Jenkins continued, his words cutting through the morning air like bitter winds. The phrase "you people" hung in the atmosphere, heavy with historical weight and present-day prejudice, a verbal weapon wielded with practiced precision. Miguel's response, when it came, carried the weight of generations who had faced similar moments with dignity. "I was born here, officer. This is my home." His voice remained steady, each word carefully chosen and delivered with clarity that belied the emotion churning beneath the surface. The simple statement of fact, his birthright, his belonging, stood in stark contrast to the officer's baseless accusations. The investigation of Miguel's stand began with theatrical aggression. Officer Jenkins's movements exaggerated for maximum effect. His hands roughly pushed aside carefully arranged displays, sending several perfectly ripe peaches rolling across the wooden counter. Each movement was a calculated violation, not just of property but of dignity, an attempt to dismantle the careful order Miguel had created every morning for years. The accusations flew like arrows, allegations of hidden contraband, insinuations about the legitimacy of his business, questions about his right to occupy this space in the market. Each charge was more baseless than the last, but they served their real purpose: to establish dominance, to create a spectacle, to remind everyone watching of who held power in this moment. Throughout this escalating confrontation, Miguel maintained a composure that spoke of deep personal strength. His responses remained measured, his tone respectful even in the face of blatant disrespect. This wasn't just about maintaining dignity. It was about survival, about understanding that in such moments, any display of justified anger could be twisted into justification for escalation. The first phone camera appeared like a silent sentinel of justice, its lens capturing what had begun as harassment and was rapidly evolving into a documented instance of institutional racism. Then another appeared, and another, until a constellation of recording devices surrounded the confrontation, each one a technological witness to the unfolding injustice. The modern-day equivalent of bearing witness had begun, turning private humiliation into public record. The crowd that gathered maintained a delicate balance between intervention and documentation. Their presence served as both protection and testimony, their phones raised not just to record, but to remind Officer Jenkins that his actions would not disappear into the void of denied accountability. The soft beeping of phones being activated and the quiet murmur of video recordings starting created a subtle but powerful soundtrack to the scene. Among the onlookers, different reactions painted a portrait of community in crisis. Elderly shoppers who had known Miguel for years stood with hands pressed to their mouths, their morning shopping forgotten in the face of witnessing such blatant injustice. Young professionals on their way to work paused, briefcases and coffee cups held loosely as they joined the growing circle of witnesses. Each face in the crowd reflected a complex mix of emotions: shock, anger, concern, and most importantly, resolve. The market's regular rhythms had completely ceased. The usual sounds of commerce, the clink of coins, the rustle of bags, the cheerful negotiations, all fell silent. In their place, a new acoustic landscape emerged: the soft whir of phone cameras, the murmured commentaries of witnesses documenting the scene, the sharp intake of breath at particularly egregious comments from the officer. Small clusters of people began to form, their whispered conversations creating a layer of commentary that spread through the market like ripples in a pond. Is this really happening? Someone should call the station. I've known Miguel for years. These fragments of conversation wove together into a tapestry of community concern and growing resistance to the injustice playing out before them. The very act of recording became a form of peaceful protest. Each raised phone represented a citizen's refusal to let this incident fade into the realm of denied experiences and dismissed complaints. The technological tools of modern life transformed into instruments of justice, their lenses capturing not just the confrontation, but the context. Miguel's meticulously maintained stand, his professional demeanor, the absolute absence of any justification for this harassment. Market vendors, many of whom had known Miguel for years, began to edge closer to his stand, their presence a silent show of solidarity. Their own experiences with prejudice and profiling reflected in their eyes as they witnessed their friend and colleague enduring what many of them had faced before. The shared understanding of such moments created an unspoken bond of support that transcended words. The documentation of the incident spread beyond the immediate vicinity, as witnesses began sharing the scene in real time through social media and text messages. The local became global as the story began to ripple outward, each share and repost expanding the circle of witnesses. The farmers' market, usually a place of local commerce and community, transformed into ground zero for a larger conversation about racism, authority, and justice in modern America. What started as one officer's prejudiced actions had inadvertently sparked a demonstration of community solidarity and technological activism. The public's reaction, captured both in their physical presence and through their digital documentation, demonstrated how modern technology could transform passive witnesses into active participants in the pursuit of justice. Each recording device represented not just an individual's choice to bear witness, but a collective refusal to allow such incidents to pass unchallenged and undocumented. The first voice that broke through the tension came from an unexpected source: Sarah Chen, a retired schoolteacher who had been buying Miguel's produce for the past 8 years. Her voice, though trembling with age, carried the authority of someone who had spent decades commanding classroom attention. "This is wrong," she declared, stepping forward with her shopping basket still clutched in her weathered hands. Her intervention sparked a cascade of courage throughout the market community. Tom Martinez, the burly owner of the adjacent flower stand, moved to stand beside Miguel's stall. His presence wasn't threatening, but it was unmistakable, a silent declaration that Miguel wasn't alone. Other vendors began to leave their posts, forming a loose semicircle that represented years of shared early mornings, borrowed change, and mutual support through difficult times. The market's ecosystem, usually focused on commerce, transformed into a unified front against injustice. The collective voice of the community grew stronger with each passing moment. A young law student, her textbooks still in her bag, stepped forward to clearly state that she was recording everything and knew their rights. A group of regular customers, people who had watched Miguel's children grow up over the years, began voicing their support. "We've known Miguel for years. This is harassment. He's a part of this community." The solidarity displayed wasn't just verbal. People began sharing their personal experiences with Miguel, stories of his generosity during hard times, his support of local schools, his consistent presence at community events. Each testimony built upon the last, creating a narrative that stood in stark contrast to Officer Jenkins's baseless accusations. These weren't just customers defending a vendor. This was a community protecting one of its own. Local business owners from nearby shops, drawn by the commotion, added their voices to the growing chorus. The owner of the cafe across the street spoke about how Miguel would bring fresh fruit for their specialty smoothies every morning before dawn. The librarian from the public library down the block recalled how Miguel had donated fruits for their children's reading program events. Each story reinforced Miguel's deep roots in the community. What made this uprising particularly powerful was its spontaneous and organic nature. There was no organized plan, no designated leader, no rehearsed response. Instead, it was the natural reaction of a community that had finally reached its breaking point. The collective decision to stand against injustice emerged from years of built-up trust, shared experiences, and mutual respect. The faces in the crowd reflected the diversity of the community itself. Different ages, ethnicities, and backgrounds united in their support of Miguel. This wasn't just about one vendor being harassed. It was about protecting the values that had made their market community special. Each person who spoke up added another thread to the tapestry of resistance, making it stronger and more vibrant. The tension in the air reached its peak as Officer Jenkins's behavior became increasingly erratic and aggressive. His initial veneer of professional authority had cracked, revealing the raw prejudice beneath. His face had reddened with anger, and his movements became more exaggerated, more threatening. The hand that had been resting on his utility belt now gripped it tightly, his knuckles whitening with tension. Miguel's composure during these moments was remarkable, almost painful to witness. His shoulders remained straight, his movements deliberate and non-threatening, even as the officer's accusations became more outlandish and offensive. The contrast between Miguel's dignity and Jenkins's losing control created a powerful visual narrative that everyone present could read clearly. The officer's voice had risen to a near shout, his words echoing off the market's walls. "You think having these people here helps you? You think this protects you?" Each question was loaded with threats barely concealed beneath the surface. The word "these" was spat out like something bitter, encompassing not just the gathered crowd, but their very right to stand in solidarity. The market's usual morning sounds had completely ceased. Even the distant traffic seemed muted, as if the city itself was holding its breath. The only sounds were Jenkins's increasingly hostile voice, the soft beeping of phones still recording, and the occasional murmur of outrage from the crowd. This acoustic vacuum amplified the tension, making each word, each movement, seem more significant. Miguel's children, who had arrived at the market for their usual weekend shift, stood frozen behind their mother at the edge of the crowd. Their faces reflected a complex mix of emotions: fear for their father, anger at the injustice, and perhaps most painfully, the loss of innocence that comes with witnessing such raw prejudice firsthand. Their presence added another layer of weight to Miguel's measured responses. He was teaching them, even now, how to face injustice with dignity. The crisis reached its apex when Jenkins, frustrated by his inability to provoke Miguel into a reaction, began roughly handling the produce displays. Apples tumbled to the ground, oranges rolled across the pavement, and carefully stacked boxes were shoved aside. Each act of destruction seemed designed to break not just the physical order of the stand, but Miguel's remarkable composure. Yet even in this moment, Miguel maintained his dignity. His hands, which had spent countless mornings arranging this produce with care, remained steadily at his sides. His voice, when he spoke, carried no trace of the anger he must have felt. "Officer, I understand you're doing your job, but this is my livelihood. These are my children watching." The simple statement carried more power than any angry response could have. The crowd's reaction to this peak of tension was like a living thing. A collective intake of breath, a unified step forward. Phones raised higher to capture every moment. The community's presence had transformed from passive observation to active protection, their bodies physically buffering the space between Miguel and the increasingly aggressive officer. What made this moment particularly powerful was its suspended quality, like a photograph capturing the exact moment before a wave breaks. The outcome hung in the balance. Would Jenkins's authority and prejudice prevail, or would the community's solidarity prove stronger? The answer would come soon, but in these frozen moments, everything that needed to be said about power, prejudice, and resistance was written in the tableau before them. Captain Sarah Rodriguez's arrival at the scene marked a pivotal moment in the unfolding drama. Her police cruiser's approach was almost silent, but her presence commanded immediate attention. Unlike Officer Jenkins's aggressive stance, her movements were measured and professional as she stepped out of her vehicle, her experienced eyes quickly scanning and assessing the situation before her. The captain's appearance itself told a story: her carefully maintained uniform, the quiet authority in her bearing, and most notably, the way she moved through the crowd with purpose but without intimidation. Her decades of experience in law enforcement were evident in how she immediately began gathering information, her approach methodical and thorough, rather than reactionary. The contrast between Captain Rodriguez's professional demeanor and Officer Jenkins's aggressive stance was stark and immediate. Where Jenkins had brought chaos, she brought order. Where he had sown fear, she exhibited calm authority. The very atmosphere of the market seemed to shift with her presence, like a pressure valve being carefully released. The captain's first actions were telling. She didn't immediately approach Jenkins or Miguel, but instead began methodically gathering testimony from the assembled witnesses. She moved through the crowd with practiced efficiency, her notebook in hand, listening to short statements while occasionally glancing at the various phone recordings being offered as evidence. Her face remained neutral, professional, but her eyes registered each piece of information with careful attention. The witnesses spoke freely to her, encouraged by her receptive demeanor. The young law student stepped forward with her phone, showing clear footage of the incident's beginning. Elderly Mrs. Chen provided her account of Miguel's years of service to the community. The neighboring vendors offered their perspectives on both Miguel's character and Jenkins's unprovoked aggression. Each testimony was noted with the same careful attention, building a comprehensive picture of the morning's events. What made Captain Rodriguez's intervention particularly effective was her ability to maintain professional distance while showing genuine concern for the community's well-being. She listened to each statement with respect, regardless of who was speaking. Her questions were precise and relevant, focused on gathering facts rather than confirming biases. This approach stood in sharp contrast to Jenkins's prejudiced assumptions and aggressive questioning. The technology aspect of the situation didn't escape her attention either. The captain understood the importance of the numerous recordings as both evidence and testimony. She methodically collected contact information from those who had footage, ensuring that a complete record of the incident would be available for the inevitable investigation. This attention to digital evidence demonstrated an understanding of modern policing that Jenkins had clearly lacked. The moment of Justice's arrival was both swift and definitive. Captain Rodriguez's voice cut through the market's tense atmosphere with calm authority. "Officer Jenkins, surrender your badge and weapon." The words, though quietly spoken, carried the weight of institutional authority finally aligned with moral justice. The impact was immediate and profound. Jenkins's reaction told its own story. The sudden drain of color from his face, the instinctive step backward, the reflexive grip on his belt. His authority, built on intimidation and prejudice, crumbled in the face of legitimate power exercised with integrity. The transformation from aggressor to accused happened in the space of a heartbeat, visible to all who watched. The process of Jenkins surrendering his badge became a powerful piece of street theater. Each movement was laden with significance: the slow reach for his badge, the reluctant extension of his arm, the final release of the symbol of authority he had so gravely misused. The medal caught the morning light one final time as it passed from his hands to the captain's, a tangible representation of power being reclaimed from those who would abuse it. The captain's next words were delivered with the same measured authority: "You're suspended pending a full investigation of this incident." The pronouncement wasn't just about one officer's misconduct. It was an acknowledgement of systemic issues and a promise of accountability. The community's collective exhale was almost audible, years of similar incidents without consequences giving weight to this moment of justice. The aftermath of the suspension unfolded like a carefully choreographed scene. Officer Jenkins was escorted to a waiting patrol car, his departure marked by the same community solidarity that had protected Miguel. Phones still recording, witnesses still watching, ensuring that this final act was documented just as thoroughly as the initial confrontation. Captain Rodriguez's handling of the situation's resolution demonstrated true leadership. She turned to address the gathered crowd, her words chosen carefully. "I want to thank this community for standing together and documenting what happened here. This is how we build trust between law enforcement and the community we serve." Her acknowledgement of the community's role in achieving justice was both strategic and sincere. The impact of justice being served rippled through the market community in visible waves. Tears were shed, some from relief, others from the release of long-held tensions. Neighbors embraced, vendors reached across their stalls to clasp hands, and a sense of validated faith in the system began to tentatively emerge. This wasn't just about one incident being resolved. It was about a community seeing that their unity and courage could affect real change. The resolution carried particular weight for Miguel's children, who had witnessed the entire scene. They saw not only their father's dignity in the face of injustice, but also the power of community solidarity and the possibility of institutional accountability. This lesson in citizenship and justice would likely stay with them far longer than any classroom teaching could have provided. Miguel himself received the captain's personal apology with the same dignity he had shown throughout the confrontation. His response was characteristic of his grace. "Thank you, Captain. All I've ever wanted was to serve my community and provide for my family." These simple words captured both the injustice of his treatment and the nobility of his response to it. Part 9. The Resolution. The formal apology from Captain Rodriguez carried weight beyond its immediate context. Standing in front of Miguel's now disrupted produce stand, her words resonated with institutional acknowledgement that had been too long in coming. "On behalf of the department, I deeply apologize for this incident," she stated, her voice carrying across the now quiet market. "This is not what we stand for, and this is not how we serve our community." The physical aftermath of Jenkins's aggressive investigation still littered the ground: scattered produce, displaced boxes, and the lingering evidence of chaos. Yet even as these words were being spoken, the community's response to the damage was already in motion. Without prompting or coordination, people began to help restore order to Miguel's stand. A teenager picked up fallen apples, carefully checking each one for bruising. An elderly woman straightened the display boxes with trembling but determined hands. A fellow vendor brought over fresh produce to replace what had been damaged. This spontaneous restoration became a powerful symbol of community healing. Each piece of fruit returned to its proper place represented a small act of defiance against the disorder that prejudice had tried to impose. The collective effort to rebuild proved more meaningful than any official apology could be. It was the community saying, in actions rather than words, "You belong here." Miguel's wife, Maria, who had arrived during the confrontation's peak, stood beside him now, her presence adding another layer to the moment's significance. Her quiet strength complemented his dignity, and together they embodied the resilience of families who had faced such moments before, but refused to be broken by them. Their children, watching from nearby, witnessed not just the resolution of a crisis, but a lesson in how communities can come together to right a wrong. The market's regular rhythms began to tentatively resume, but with a different quality now. Conversations were more purposeful, connections more meaningful. People who had been mere acquaintances before found themselves bound by the shared experience of standing together against injustice. The simple act of buying produce became laden with additional significance. Each transaction now carried an undertone of solidarity and support. Captain Rodriguez's handling of the aftermath demonstrated a deep understanding of community policing. She didn't just leave after delivering the apology. She stayed, helping to restore order, providing her contact information for follow-up, and, most importantly, listening to the community's concerns about preventing similar incidents in the future. Her presence transformed from that of an authority figure to that of a community partner in healing. The following days at the market revealed a transformed community, one strengthened rather than diminished by the crisis it had weathered together. Miguel's stand, now restored to its usual pristine order, became something of a symbol, not just of resistance to injustice, but of the power of community solidarity. The morning light caught the fresh produce displays just as it always had, but now each carefully arranged fruit seemed to carry additional meaning. The presence of Miguel's family at the stand took on new significance. His wife, Maria, now spent more mornings there, not out of fear, but as a quiet assertion of their right to occupy this space together. Their children, rather than being shielded from the market after the incident, became more involved in the family business. Their presence was both practical and symbolic, a statement that fear would not dictate their choices. Regular customers made a point of not just shopping, but spending time at Miguel's stand, their conversations extending beyond the usual pleasantries about produce selection. They shared stories of their own experiences with prejudice, creating a deeper bond of understanding. The simple act of buying fruit became a form of community affirmation, each transaction reinforcing the message that Miguel and his family belonged. The market's social fabric had been rewoven stronger than before. Vendors who had previously kept to their own stalls now engaged more with each other, creating an informal support network. They developed subtle signals to alert one another of potential problems and established informal protocols for standing together in the face of any future incidents. This enhanced solidarity wasn't just about protection, it was about creating a more connected community. The physical space of the market itself seemed transformed. Where before there had been invisible boundaries between different vendors' territories, now there was a more fluid sense of shared space. Customers lingered longer, engaged in deeper conversations, and moved between stalls with a new awareness of the market as a unified community rather than just a place of commerce. Miguel's stand became a subtle but powerful symbol of resilience. The way he arranged his produce each morning, with the same care and attention as always, spoke of unshakable dignity. His continued warm greetings and genuine smile demonstrated a refusal to let fear or bitterness take root. The quality of his service remained impeccable, but now carried an additional layer of meaning. Each perfectly selected piece of fruit was an act of continued dedication to his community. The transformation extended beyond the market's regular hours. Community meetings began to be held in the space after closing time, with vendors and customers coming together to discuss ways to prevent future incidents and strengthen their bonds. These gatherings, often informal but deeply meaningful, helped transform a place of business into a true community center. The presence of children at the market took on new significance. Parents began using Miguel's stand as a teaching moment, explaining to their children about standing up against injustice and the importance of community solidarity. The market became not just a place to buy fresh produce, but a living classroom for lessons about citizenship, courage, and community. Even the physical layout of the market subtly shifted to reflect the new reality. Vendors rearranged their stalls to create better sightlines and more open spaces, making it harder for anyone to be isolated or targeted. These changes, while practical, also symbolized the community's commitment to protecting its own.